a lot of what I'm sharing with you is the research that I have, the history that I have. So to the best of our ability, we try to put this kind of stuff in. We could never meet all the needs of your kids. No school's going to do that. We can do a really good job on the academic need. So what we do at an earlier stage is, if children are ready, you've got to give them the chance to grow. And that means you've got to lift up the ceiling as far as they can possibly go, so that whatever talent, whatever capacity is there, they can develop it. The second thing you want is some kind of a mentor/teacher who knows the subject as well as possible. They're a reading teacher, then it's very important that that teacher's a reader. Otherwise, I mean, if my wife and I joke back and forth, she loves poetry. So she has children in her class. She takes, you have to see this. If you can, come to the 8th grade, the poetry show. You won't believe what she gets these 8th grade boys to do. You know, I mean, they're all so cool. And she's got them reciting poetry, acting just so childish and loving it. And you know why she can do it? She loves poetry. She reads poetry. She writes poetry. So when she works with kids, to her, it just oozes from her. Well, that's what you want for teachers. It's relative. You know, this is elementary school. You're not going to get an expert. I teach math. I think I'm pretty good at it. But there are so many better math teachers in the country than I. Still, I love it. And I have a little bit of a knack at showing kids how to grow in that subject. When my wife and I joke, you know, I say, will you come and teach my math sometime? So one time she substituted. You know what she did? She taught them a rhyming poem song about mathematics. How dare you defile my subject? But yet, you know, it goes the other way around. If I teach poetry to 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade children, they're going to learn haiku. That's it. That's all they're going to know. They will get no appreciation for poetry or poets, because you need the teacher there. And I'm just going to relay another story. We just had one of our students got accepted at Phillips Exeter, you know, one of the top high schools in the country. And his deciding issue was, you know, where he would get the superior education. And he was looking at a few schools in Cleveland, another one in Indiana. And finally, when he and I were talking, I said, so what convinced you? He says, well, school A has Mr. So-and-so, nationally known in physics. School B has teacher so-and-so, nationally known with the writing program. But at Phillips Exeter, I have a teacher like that in every subject and every grade level. Well, he was a brilliant kid. He wanted the best. Now, I'm not saying everybody should go to Phillips Exeter. That's not my point. But my point is, if you have the capacity, you want to be with people who could bring you another level. That's the thought. And a generalist, this is why we departmentalize at Birchwood, meaning you have a separate teacher for English, for reading, a separate teacher for writing, a separate teacher for math, because, as I said earlier, when I taught 2nd grade, my children loved math, they loved writing, they loved science, and reading was so-so. Then the next year, they come home and say, Mommy, I love reading, you know, but the teacher they have doesn't care for math. So they come home, I love writing, I love writing, I love reading. Honey, what are you doing in math? I don't remember. Well, the teacher didn't know anything about math. Because it's very hard for one person to be enthusiastic for 5 or 6 subjects. It's just very difficult. So you get this excitement one year, but then not the next year. The third component, I think I'm pretty good here with time, you want them around peers, to whom education is very important. Maybe in the popular press, you've read stories where children who are bright have to hide their giftedness because they're teased, they're picked on. It's not cool to be smart, and so they bury it. Well, how can you flourish in that environment? You're not going to be able to. They need peers who are talking about where they want to go to high school, where they want to go to college, the kind of person they want to become. They feed off one another. And then in that environment, once again, they have the desire to take whatever capacities they have as far as they will go. Fourthly, and this is one very seldom talked about, but I think is critical, especially when children reach the ages 11, 12, and 13 years of age. You have to cultivate wisdom. And what I mean by that, they have to become familiar that the history of great people is the history of people wrestling with the great issues of life. Life is not black and white. There's a good, there's a bad. People who make this, especially leaders. If you've worked for a poor leader in a company, you know the frustration of somebody who doesn't understand the institutional history, who doesn't understand people, who doesn't take the time to listen to other perspectives, who can't bring in perspectives from other disciplines. They're just, it's my way or the highway. Yeah, you're smarter than I am, you're in a higher position than I am, but you can tell there's no sense of how to bring people together, how to understand situations, to be a real, true problem solver. So the teaching of wisdom, and I'll give you a couple of examples, generally through history and through literature. You know, history needs to be studied. Of course, you need to know names, you need to know dates, you need to know sequences, but the most important part of history is understanding the great trials and struggles and advances and all the struggle that went into that. There's always multiple perspectives. You know, we're in the middle of, with my 8th grade students, we have a program called the Ben Franklin program, and we watch 5 or 6 Academy Award movies. Little clips every day, 15 minutes. And then we talk about the people in those movies. You know, what's going on in their head? What are they afraid of? What would keep them back from what they want to do? And we were watching Amazing Grace, the story of William Wilberforce, and a very powerful scene at the beginning when he's gambling with the king's son, and William Wilberforce, everyone knows he's an abolitionist, and they make fun of him because the general consensus at the end of the 18th century, of course, slavery is normal. How are you going to have an economic situation if you don't have slavery? And so you have this powerful scene when they're gambling. William Wilberforce wins. The king's son doesn't have any money with him, and the house rules are you pay up. And so he calls to one of his servants. He says, "Go out and get my boy." And this big, strapping African-American comes in. And of course, he's using vulgar language to describe him. And then he tells them, you just take him in place of the money that I owe on the bet. Well, then we just stopped the movie there. You know, and we talked about the wall that William Wilberforce is going to have to face. He knows what's right. He feels it deeply in his heart that he has to have a part in abolishing the slave trade. But just who would do it? And the entire room was mocking him, laughing at him because he got put in a corner about how do you feel about slaves. And then we just talked, how would you fight against that? And we all admitted, I don't think I'd have the guts to do that. Well, the point is, not that I'm going to convince them, well, you can if you want, you know, just be tough, but to understand history. The things that are done by great people, it doesn't change. Generation after generation, there are people who make real differences in life, and they go through real experiences of being challenged and running up against impossible odds, but they are not going to give up. Part of that is where the wisdom comes from. You hold to what you believe are true, and you struggle through. And me, when I teach gifted kids, I hope every kid who goes through my class, whatever field it is, whether it's economics or science or history or whatever, they would learn there are certain things I will never compromise. And I hold on to a little piece of research when you deal with this, that pictures stay with children. That's why one of our programs we read to the children great historical events and biographies, because mental pictures stick with them their whole life. And they have the possibility of speaking to them. You know, so it's my hope one day one of them will have some responsibility somewhere and they'll just remember, William Wilberforce. You never know. But the teaching of wisdom and all that involves in becoming a great leader and a person who benefits society is critical. And this, probably you'll hear this more from me. I don't think you'll read this many places, but I'm quite convinced this is an important part of Youth Today. Okay, then 2 more pieces and then I'll stop. This one is very, very important. Gifted children have got to be challenged, commensurate with their abilities. You know the biggest problem with gifted children in America today? Bad work habits, bad attitudes about life. Because everything has come easy to them. And so they have just picked up the path of least resistance. And you'd think that would make them happy? No, it makes them miserable. Because the fullness and happiness of being a person is developing your talent. So if you're not sufficiently challenged, I like to say it's important to make sure your gifted child is working just as hard as the little boy or little girl who's a C student, but they break their backs to get an A. Okay, if you can get your gifted children to work that hard, wow, then their talents are just going to soar. You know, somebody says, well, I've heard this a number of times, that, you know, he's gifted. He's got an IQ of 130, he's going to do fine. And you know, I want to tell him, you're right. In a comparative sense, he or she is going to do fine. They're smarter than everybody else. I don't know if you know people like this. I know a lot of people who are smarter than me, and you know, I have to work 10 times harder than they. They just make it. They got their act together. But don't kid yourself for a moment. What produces the sense of self-worth is not your money, it's not your house, it's not your achievements. It's the fact that what talents you had are brought as far as they can. And unless you have work ethics that match that, then you withdraw. Challenge comes, you hide. So it's one of my strong feelings that at an early age, children need to begin to cultivate, let's just work a little harder, a little longer, honey. It's just another 5 minutes, another 2 minutes. You're cultivating work habits. And therefore the challenge has to be difficult. One of the reasons, there's many reasons why we do academic competitions, but one of them is because these gifted kids need a bigger field to play on. They're even here. They're extraordinary talents. So, okay, let's take our math team and compete Northeast Ohio. See how you do. Okay, not too bad. Very good. We did well. How about the state of Ohio? Not that great. Wonderful lesson. One of the students came to me about 2-3 years ago, and he was just cocky. He's smarter than everybody else. Even, you know, in our school, we have a lot of bright kids, cocky, you know. And I said, you know, the kids at the competition in the state, they really study. Yeah, I know. I'll look at it again. We go down there, there's 212 participants. He's 192nd. He came in 190. You should have just seen his face after that. I was so happy. He was so depressed. 192nd. Yeah. He says, I never want this happen to me again. I said, well, you got two choices. Don't participate, then it won't happen to you again. And of course, you will never learn to fight through anything. Or you need to start today to get ready for next year. And he did. And the next year, he came in first in the state. And then 20th in the country. That was such a wonderful opportunity. Well, he went off, and when he wrote me after the family moved to Connecticut, and he's written me a couple of times. And the most gratifying response from him is not how well he's done in math, but what he learned in this environment. We did the same thing in History Day. If you know, those of you who remain until your children are in the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, they do History Day. They work their tail off for 5 or 6 months. And 9 times out of 10, they lose. And when they lose, they cry. And they blame the judge, and they blame Mrs. Miller, and they blame Mr. Debelak, and everybody gets blamed. Within a half hour, they're talking about what their project's going to be next year. Almost without fail. So on one hand, they're devastated. They lost. That stuff doesn't last. In our American psychology, sometimes I think, and I say, oh, I don't want him to suffer. Kids are resilient. And when they put in time and effort, and they know they put together something excellent, they know it. So they may not get that gold medallion, but something inside them that says, I like this. I want to do this again. And so then they'll invest themselves even after a big failure and a big disappointment.